Remember these guys? The anti-tax, anti-Obama protesters we first saw back on Tax Day 2009. Well, that later morphed into the Tea Party. Now, to be honest, we didn't like them that much. Andrew was embedded with them. He got more than an earful that day. But now their time may have come, and it is Republicans, not Democrats, who may be leading the push to show them the door here. Now, the latest bit of anti-Tea Party momentum, it came this past Tuesday as GOP insiders looked at two big races in Virginia and in New Jersey and began to worry about the party prospects. And they have such an opportunity next year in 2014 in those midterms. But what that Tea Party wing of the party may cost them, and then, of course, the big contest in 2016. Andrew?
Well, Rich, while Republicans certainly had some wins to crow about on Tuesday, wins for the Tea Party were harder to find. Certainly not one in Virginia, where Tea Party candidate Ken Cuccinelli lost what many consider to be a very beatable Democratic challenger. And the Tea Party didn't just lose to Democrats on Tuesday. In a Republican runoff for an open congressional seat in Alabama, a business-backed, more mainstream Republican beat a Tea Party challenger. The winner all but guaranteed that seat in Washington, the first time groups like the Chamber of Commerce turned on the Tea Party, seeking less ideological candidates. And it won't be the last, likely. Across the nation, establishment Republican leaders are looking for solutions to avoid more Tea Party trouble, from funding incumbents to stem off primary challengers to even changing how the candidates are chosen, looking to dump caucuses where more motivated, more conservative candidates thrive in favor of primaries where establishment figures and money tend to fare better. And then there's Chris Christie. He, the unqualified star of Tuesday's election, set to appear on every network this weekend as the moderate or more centrist GOP frontrunner, if that is, he can dodge the Tea Party claims of Republican in name only. Christie has already shown a willingness, even an enthusiasm, to take on the Tea Party, attacking Rand Paul out of the blue for Paul's desire for greater isolationism. This week, Paul returned the favor, slamming Christie for his comments about the state of D.C. politics and for essentially campaigning on the aftermath of Hurricane Sandy. Clearly, Rich, their battle is on, and this still more than 2 years away from the first presidential primary of the 2016 cycle.
You know, Bill, I'm curious from your perspective because I'll take just a couple local races. Rob Astorino, not this election cycle, but the first time he was running, and for that matter, even Ed Mangano at Long Island. Tea Party label didn't bother them 5 years ago when we threw it around. This time they made it clear, whoa, 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 don't put that tag on me. How has it changed? I know New York isn't Alabama or somewhere else, but how has it changed where it went from being something you'd want to be associated with, if not even fully embraced, to something that you want to keep at arm's length?
I mean, I think the Tea Party, when it started, I remember a poll 4 or 5 years ago where it was like 60% of Republicans said that they considered themselves Tea Party when that movement first began. But what the Tea Party is raw. I mean, it's raw. There's a lot of anger in it, but it's an important part of the Republican conservative movement because it's the energy to the movement. So there is some benefit to it being out there, but it's hurt the party and the party's hurt it. So it goes back and forth, but it became a little bit raw and it became a little bit wild, and it's the proverbial loose gun out there, the loose cannon. And that's what's really happened to it. It's also been tagged very well by the left, has done a good job of
and wouldn't you say that the radio right and the folks like that, the Limbaughs to a degree, the Becks, and even then the Palins and the Bachmans, it's an easy label to have. You say Tea Party, you know instantly what you're talking about. You say anti-government, anti-taxes, whatever. Right. You can sell those in sound bites. So while the left says, oh, I'll do this, has it gotten to the point where internally they say, listen, we love the ideological fight. I may even agree with you, but I like to win.
Right, exactly.
But how do you have that conversation where reality prevails? And I remember after last year, after the president won, the head of the RNC, right, did his postmortem, and he said, guys, here's our problem. Our base, it's just all white guys, okay? We can't win going forward. It's going to be harder and harder as the demographics keep changing. You were probably on with him that week. And he said, we got to change this. Well, for the next year, they basically gave him a one-figure salute, so we're going to keep doing it our way. And they look at where they lost that year. They look at some of the candidates that still proffer up. Why should the folks around this table think that it's going to be any different next year, where a Republican can get through a primary without losing to another Tea Party guy, notwithstanding what Andrew just read?
Yeah, I mean, they have to learn. I mean, for example, you mentioned Rob Astorino, and I just came off his race. Yep. I mean, he won in our internal polls. I don't know, there were no exit polls, so we don't know what the actual numbers were. But in our last internal, he was winning 61% of the Latino vote. So here's someone who got it, who went out there and spent time in the community.
Also the African American community.
Exactly.
But he's the anomaly.
That's very important. Exactly. And people in other parts of the country may have to learn that the hard way over time. But it's a little bit more complicated because it's not just the Tea Party, it's also libertarians. And a lot of people throw the libertarians and the Tea Party into one pot. They're two different groups. I mean, the Ron Paulites are libertarians. They're isolationists and they're libertarians. It's a different group than the Tea Party group. So it's actually three factions moving on within the Republican Party.
Use Rob Astorino for a second here. I know I've had three prominent Republicans, but you know all these guys, and they all said, statewide, we got no roster. Rob Astorino is at the top of the list for the next statewide race, whether it's for governor, senator, or whatever. If he wants it, we'll clear the decks. You know and I know, Mike Long's a great guy, okay? But there's no way you're going to get the seal of approval from the Conservative Party unless you're basically on the right side of this issue on abortion, meaning you're pro-life here. You're on the right side of the issue as it relates with gun control. We can go down the normal social checklist, gay marriage, etc. That's fine to get the primary, but when you're in states where you could have a fighting chance to win, you're almost dead on arrival when you get to the general. How do you navigate that as a Republican to survive a primary but yet have a chance to win a general?
A lot is in your demeanor. You can be pro-life, you can be a traditional conservative, but in your demeanor,
said a Tea Party with a smile.
Tea Party with a smile. But if you're not angry and you seem like a reasonable person, you can hold those convictions. And I think people respect that. People who do hold convictions. Look at Chris Christie. Chris Christie said he opposed same-sex marriage. Chris Christie is pro-life, and he said, "Take it or leave it. That's what I am." And still, in a very, very blue state, he ran away with it. People will respect that if you stand by it, if you don't act like a jerk.
But
if
Christie's
you're not angry.
personality, Evan, I don't think can be multiplied into other people. He comes off as genuine and authentic, and sometimes when people try to do that a little too hard, it comes off as fake. I think he's unique in that aspect. Use Christie as an example. Can he navigate, in your estimation, the national primary process if he runs in 2016? And yet still be viable in a general? Or will he have to capitulate like Romney did to get through the original firefight?
Well, I think it's important to remember that Chris Christie is a national star because of the size of his win on Tuesday. And the reason for that is in part because he had one of the weakest Democratic challengers ever to run for governor in New Jersey or probably any other state.
All the Democrats were scared to run against.
Absolutely. But his margin is added to by the fact that he had a terrible opponent. Put that, with that context, his problem is, as long as there's a heaping dose of crazy that exists in the Tea Party, and I'm not saying they're all crazy, but there's a heaping dose of crazy that is there, and as long as they're very irrational on the subject of Barack Obama, at the end of Barack Obama's second term, the guy who famously put his arm around him in the closing days of the last election, I think he's going to have problems. No matter what ideological purity test he hits, he's going to have problems.
Definitely. No doubt about it. Governor Christie, like I said yesterday, I know you think I'm a little biased against him. He's the flavor of the month. I mean, he's on the cover, I think, Time magazine
this week.
The elephant in the room.
And they take a shot at him with the elephant in the room. That's a little unfair. But I mean,
well, I don't think he's offended by it. He'll take that. I mean, and that's why he's doing the Sunday show.
He's been very careful, though.
But do you think you can win? Can you be a pro-life candidate in 2013 and win the presidency?
We've all been to Iowa and the New Hampshires and the South Carolinas. No, he cannot win. He can sell you a good game and tell you that he can, and he might win some of those more moderate states, but he's not going to get the nomination.
Weren't we having the same conversation about Rudy? I'm sorry, but weren't we having the same conversation about Rudy Giuliani 4 years ago?
But Giuliani was pro-life. He was pro-choice. He was pro-gay marriage, gay rights. Christie's been very careful. Christie is pro-life. He hasn't moved off of that. He hasn't moved on his positions on marriage. He hasn't moved off it. He's been very careful.
I'm with Bill for a different reason. I think if you come off in today's day and age, if you have convictions but are competent, and you're not so ideological that you're not willing to change, and I think he conveyed that with Sandy. He conveyed that where he said, go screw to anybody who wouldn't give funding, including Republicans, for Sandy, like Peter King. I think people, and I keep beating this to death, the story. I went into a room with him with a full firefighters who booed him when he walked in. They gave him a standing O when he walked out. And he told them in the meeting they weren't getting what they wanted.
People
want that.
South Carolina.
A, he was the only one talking that day. And B, this is 20 years now into this process of labeling Republicans in name only. The rise of Rush Limbaugh in the early 90s, this is the Republican Party reaping what it's sown. The Tea Party is the result of that process.
Don't you think they're getting tired of losing?
It's not. There's a strong thread that thinks, boy, if we only had a more conservative candidate, a truly conservative candidate, we'd win.
Yeah, but if you look but if you look at the last president that won in New York State, last Republican was Ronald Reagan. very conservative, pro-life, all the rest of it. Rudy Giuliani governed as a conservative. He won the Upper West Side in his re-election.
The next Republican,
because he was firm, because he was a leader, because he took charge. People were willing to find common ground.
The next Republican elected president ain't going to win New York.
And piggybacking off of Andrew's point, he's right. Because in the recent contest in Virginia, the Tea Party folks, and they make a legitimate argument that, hey, if the National Party had put some money into that contest, they may have the governor's seat tonight.
I want to tell everybody a couple programming notes. Trust me, but we're going to be talking about the Tea Party. I have a feeling again here, so this won't be our last conversation. But a couple of things that we're doing here on RFL. By now, you've all heard, obviously, about that NFL bullying story that, obviously, within the locker room dynamic of the Miami Dolphins, it raised a whole host of interesting questions and the continuing problems the league's having here, as well with head trauma and the tragedy. If you've been following the Tony Dorsett story here, we're going to be talking about those stories tomorrow night. We're going to be joined by Howard Cross. If you're a Giant fan, I don't need to tell you about the tight end who was there in some of the glory years. We'll also be joined by a former member of the Jets. And in our second half of the program, we are going to be rebroadcasting a program that we did, and it's very timely now because this weekend is the 75th anniversary of a dark day forever linked with state-run terror and destruction known as Kristallnacht, or the Night of Broken Glass. This the weekend back in 1938 when Nazi-backed forces and civilians went on rampages through the Jewish communities of Germany, making clear where German Jews really stood in the eyes of Hitler's Nazi Germany. And with that anniversary in mind, tomorrow night at 6:30, we will rerun our RFL special report, The New Nazis. Regular RFL panelist Richard Brodsky led the look here at Nazism that has never really gone away, especially in parts of Europe, and that is now boiling back to the surface. He went back and saw firsthand what's going on, even in some European governments. That again, tomorrow night at 6:30. Now, coming up next, we will switch gears to an issue that played out on Tuesday night here in other parts of the country and got us to asking about its future potentially here. I'm talking about marijuana and legality and prohibition of it. Who knew that pot would be the next social policy revolution after gay marriage that's moving so quickly? You've got to see where the polls are on this. When we come back, we'll talk about it and the chances that it could be legalized in the not too distant future.